HR 6600 and S 3199 bills are the topical potential sanctions Ethiopians are strongly voicing their dismay against, reiterating that they could endanger national security, citizens' rights, as well as the country's sovereignty. And I'm going to discuss these issues with Professor Ann Fitz-Gerald from Canada. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Addis Dialogue. With the program, I'm Shifaralago, Digital Desk. Professor, thank you so much for joining me, and it's really good to see you again.
Thank you.
As you have been following new developments in Ethiopia, in an apparent move to ensure lasting solutions to internal problems, Ethiopia has declared humanitarian truce. So in your view, let me ask you this question. What are some of its implications in this regard? And what is your take on this latest move by the Ethiopian government?
Thank you very much. I think it's a very positive move. I think I would say that it wasn't remarkably different from the situation that we saw on the side of the Ethiopian government. They had ended the state of emergency. They were trying to enable humanitarian access into the northern regions, particularly Tigray, where there were challenges because of the TPLF occupation or reoccupation of 5 districts in Afar near the border area. But this truce, I saw two key differences actually. The word truce was used, so we were getting away from ceasefire and the vernacular that was used before. And secondly, I saw the word indefinite used. So that is a very strong word, and it really emulates a commitment. We did hear some regional voices over the last week from the Afar region indicating that there may be difficulties in getting the aid through to Tigray as long as the TPLF forces were occupying those areas. So I also interpreted the announcement as a commitment from the Afar regional government to the best of its ability support aid getting through, despite all the challenges that it has faced over the last 6 months. So it's a very positive move. It's even more positive that the TPLF has acknowledged that it intends to reciprocate as well. Time will tell how this all pans out. But peace is very important. Getting humanitarian access to the communities in need and ensuring that aid delivery goes to those communities and is distributed in an expeditious and a comprehensive way, all must be the priority at the moment.
Okay. Following that, Prof, the United States of America seems to be interested in what is going on in Ethiopia, especially now that the government has decided to put this humanitarian truce. So should the government of Ethiopia be wary of this, or should they take it at face value? What do you think?
Well, I think the announcements and the statements and the tweets that were going out over the last 48 hours following the announcement of the humanitarian truce and the reciprocal announcement and commitment from the TPLF were all very positive. It showed that not just the United States of America, but Western partners like the United Kingdom, the European Union, and others were all coming together and recognizing that this was indeed a good thing. I think the question that I would pose about the United States' position on this at the moment and on Ethiopia more generally is what is happening with these 2 bills that are being pushed forward in both the House and the Senate. Because it seems to me that the positive encouragement to the government in its move towards peace and the country in its move towards peace could be very quickly undermined by the content and the intentions embraced by those 2 bills. So, I think we should take it generally as very positive in terms of the direction that the resolution, the gradual resolution to a long and unfortunate and tragic and unnecessary conflict is going in. But I think a lot hinges on these two bills that are being considered by both the House and the Senate in the United States at the moment.
Yeah, all right. Prof, talking about these two bills, you know, as if one was not enough, they are mulling over two bills, HR 6600 and S 3199. So it seems that they are hedging their bets on punishing Ethiopia, right?
Well, these bills, I mean, Congress and House play a very important accountability role in government as the lower house and the upper house, and like other governments around the world. The fact that there are two bills with a lot of similar content reflects the fact that these bills are often driven forward as projects of individuals or small groups that try to rally support for those bills so they are eventually passed or they are eventually dismissed. So these bills also move forward as a result of investigations and very hard lobbyist efforts and pressure from constituents. So because there's two bills, if both pass, there will probably be some reconciliation between both of them and a final bill on the table. But this reflects the fact that the draft bill content is never really complete until the bill goes to vote. So time has passed since the initial consideration. We may see some edits in the drafting, we may see some changes in the content. And, you know, I think this is worrying because sanctions are very harsh, they come with harsh implications. And the government of Ethiopia appears to have met most of the requests from the US government and international partners. So, you know, many people out there are asking, why such harsh sanctions? You know, no, Ethiopia has not invaded another sovereign country. Yes, reports have emerged about human rights atrocities, but they have emerged from 3 conflict-affected regions and not from 1. And I am still hearing some senators speak about a conflict going on in 1 region only, and about human rights abuses and atrocities happening in 1 region only, despite the reports that have come out recently from Afar and Amara. So, you know, I suspect that from an early time in the conflict, we saw political representatives in the United States taking a very hard and absolute position on issues concerning human rights abuses and genocide. And I suspect that what we're seeing in the form of these bills and the push towards this agenda is some continuity behind that drive. And but it's resulting in mixed messages. So, you know, the support behind the government's commitment to the humanitarian truce weighed against the pushing forward of these bills. I mean, that's sending considerable mixed messages, not just to Ethiopia, but to the very large Ethio-American diaspora, and also to other African countries across the continent, which will be looking at this very carefully.
Have you seen the application of these types of sanctions before? If so, in what circumstances? And what does research tell us about the impacts of sanctions like this?
Well, sanctions have been applied in a number of cases, particularly in the aftermath of conflict or during conflict, when one state is behaving not in accordance with international law and international norms. But we see that the impact of sanctions and what research says about the impact is that they do hit the bottom of the food chain and they rarely target and impact the leaders themselves. Sudan, next door to Ethiopia, is a very interesting case in point, because if you if you speak to some of the Sudanese people and thought leaders, and I have many friends who live in Sudan, they would argue that they feel right now that they're still under sanctions, despite the fact that the sanctions were lifted some years ago. In order to make a money transfer, they have to send funds only through Western Union. That is their only option to send money to the US. Western Union, as you know, the rates are not good. It lacks flexibility. And it really curbs the innovation that is necessary to pivot economy from a post-conflict economy to one that takes on an upward trajectory. Sanctions can be targeted sanctions against certain individuals, groups, or they can be sectoral. And, what's coming out of these bills and the content of the bills seem to be, a mix of both. Sanctions, the way they're written in these bills and the way we've seen them impact elsewhere can have a huge economic impact on trade, amassing of hard currency and foreign exchange, which is very important to a country like Ethiopia at the moment. And it's even more important after the conflict because hard currency is important for sourcing material that rebuilds infrastructure. And if you think about the devastated infrastructure in Amara, Afar, and Tigray, you could argue that it will be very difficult to revive things like schools and health facilities. And over 3,000, of course, have been impacted by the conflict. So, it's almost like saying, well, let's leave these conflict-affected areas in their dilapidated, destroyed condition at the moment, because it will be very difficult to create the wherewithal and the favorable economic conditions to support their rebuilding. Sanctions also target countries that sometimes step in and try to fill the gaps that the sanction initiating country has left. So Iran is an example that comes to my mind, and the punishment that was given to German and Swiss banks when they tried to facilitate Iran-initiated transactions. So sanctions are very ugly and harsh, and they're also not a passing fad. Their effects linger, as we've seen in Sudan and elsewhere, and they're felt for years to come. So they really risk unraveling a lot of progress that have been made. Even, they impact remittances and the use of international banking credit cards in the country. So, and we know that these international credit cards are used to project hard currency towards necessary expenditures, like the expenditure on medication for people, the expenditure on medical surgeries for family members, regional flights to Lalibela, Barhadar. So, there would be inevitable restrictions in that area as well. And we're already seeing lobbyist groups in Washington call strongly for remittances to be impacted.
In this connection, if taken forward, what do you think are some of the other impacts, if any, could be?
Well, like I said, investment, foreign direct investment, certainly. And don't forget that these sanctions would be coming on top of the cessation of Ethiopians' membership in AGOA as well. And AGOA was a very important platform, not just for Ethiopia, but for other African countries, because Ethiopia was really the hub of AGOA transaction activity. And this impacts not only Ethiopia, but those in the United States that were encouraged to invest in Ethiopia. And this happened under the Trump administration. It also happened under the Biden administration, where investors were encouraged under AGOA to invest in Ethiopia. So it will restrict investment at a very critical time. And sanctions, the short-term effect of sanctions can often be mitigated with a lot of cash reserves. And this is what Russia did when it had sanctions imposed on it after the annexation of the Crimea. But in Ethiopia's case, it doesn't have a large amount of cash reserves. You will have to spend more to get less because of inflationary pressures, and government will also have to spend more to get less. And sometimes you see the impact of sanctions further impacting pension funds because the government has to borrow from pension funds to support its budget. You know, there's been a tremendous amount of progress in Ethiopia's Millennium Development Goals and Sustainable Development Goals over the last 20 years. And I fear that the progress that has been made, particularly over the last 5 to 8 years, risks being unraveled because of the harshness of these sanctions and how they will impact on critical enablers to bring about that prosperity that the country is aiming for. The goals towards women, females, disadvantaged groups, marginalized groups, other aspects of the Sustainable Development Agenda. So I think that sanctions will have a negative impact all around. It will dissuade others, not just those affected by the AGOA agreement, to invest in the country. And Ethiopia will also turn to other partners if these bills pass to try to fill the gaps. And of course, some of those partners are countries like China and others. And this will just further aggravate the existing tensions already in the region between global powers like China and the United States. So one could argue, therefore, that it is not in the United States' interest to pursue these bills because of the impact it would have on their mid to longer term economic security interests.
So, Professor, it is clear that you're suggesting that you're not in agreement with the concept behind these sanctions. I think that this represents the view of the vast majority of Ethiopians and friends of Ethiopia globally. So what, in your view, can be done to stop the destructive sanctions from going forward?
My view is always to demonstrate a commitment to evidence, facts, figures, and informed analysis. And I think Ethiopian thought leaders in its very rich civil society across the country, as well as its diaspora thought leaders and its political establishment, should be in a position to explain very clearly to the US political representatives involved in these bills and representing constituencies around the United States what is at risk, not just nationally and not just regionally and continentally, but also geopolitically, and what will most certainly end up hurting the interests of Ethiopia, the continent, and the United States and Western partners in the mid to longer term. So I would say continue asking sense-making questions, continue asking questions that interrogate the currency of the content in these bills, especially in light of the recent measures being taken, ask questions in light of the fact that since the humanitarian ceasefire last June 2021 and the subsequent measures that have taken place and been made by the Ethiopian government to meet US requests to streamline the humanitarian process, US requests to end the state of emergency, US requests to not, or pressure felt not to deploy forces back into the border area around Afar. the release of political prisoners, these gestures should add up to a reciprocal response or a proportional response from the side of those putting the country under pressure of sanctions. And we don't see that proportional response having been taken yet. Hopefully that's still to come. Hopefully these, what appear to be divisions in the US political establishment at the moment over the fate of Ethiopia, i.e. real encouragement and support and a vote of confidence behind the government and the TPLF's recent commitment for peace. And yet, on the other hand, the harsh sanctions that are being threatened, both in the House and the Senate. Some sort of reconciliation has to be made there. The Biden administration will ultimately play a leadership role in making this call. And just really for Ethiopia to remain concerned with other African partners as well, which will no doubt be looking at this treatment and wondering, what it will mean for them. Countries that cooperate regularly with Ethiopia, that want to see a strong Ethiopia and stability in the region.
Maybe before we wrap up our discussion, do you have any message that you want to convey to Ethiopians and friends of Ethiopia about these punitive sanctions, if you will?
Any last message as well? I would say that it's a very serious issue. So those who have expressed concern on social media, on television and broadcast media have every reason to do so. If they move forward, these sanctions would have some serious and longer-term implications, not only for Ethiopia and the continent, but also for US interests. So let's hope that both members of the House and the Senate will acknowledge and reconcile these issues with their longer-term economic interests in the Horn of Africa region. For the Ethiopian people, I would say, continue to do the very impressive job that you have done through this horrendous 17 months to stay united, to stand together, not just behind, and not behind politics and particular individuals, but for the purposes of a healthy, peaceful, and prosperous Ethiopia.
Professor, thank you so much for that message. And thank you indeed for your wonderful ideas and for your time. And I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Well, dear viewers, with that, we come to the end of today's program. Many thanks for watching us. Bye-bye.